Boundary engineering in high-stakes institutions describes a structural condition in which institutional stability depends on where boundaries are drawn and how much interpretive pressure those boundaries can carry. The central distinction is simple. A boundary is not a line. Access control is not stability. Enforcement is not thickness. High-stakes institutions draw distinctions: inside from outside, relevant from irrelevant, admissible from inadmissible, accountable from non-accountable. These distinctions are often treated as administrative lines. When failure occurs, attention moves toward whether the line was drawn or enforced correctly. Boundary engineering shifts the focus. The question is not only where the boundary is, the question is whether the boundary has enough structural thickness to absorb, delay, and translate the pressure that reaches it. A thin boundary allows interpretive pressure to pass through almost directly. Complex cases are categorized too quickly. Ambiguous inputs become binary decisions. External pressure enters before translation into a form the institution can hold. A thick boundary does not mean a rigid boundary. Thickness means buffering capacity, layered interpretation, delayed admission, translation stages, and tolerance for ambiguity before a matter reaches the institutional core. Under high semantic load, boundary failure is rarely just a failure of enforcement. It is a failure of capacity. The institution may still appear to have a boundary. The rules may still exist. The formal categories may remain visible, but if the boundary no longer absorbs pressure, its function has already weakened. Boundary collapse can occur without open conflict. It appears when complex cases are closed too quickly, when dominant templates replace interpretation, and when boundary labor is displaced inward, so that the institutional core must absorb what the edge no longer filters. Boundary engineering also describes entry conditions. Not everything that approaches the system can enter it in the same form. Some inputs require translation, some require delay, some cannot enter without damaging the system that receives them. Non-entry is therefore not always equivalent to exclusion. It can also mark a structural capacity condition. The model does not claim that every refusal, delay, or barrier is justified. It describes a structural problem. When incompatible or excessive input is forced through a thin boundary, collapse may move inward rather than remain at the point of entry. The result is often premature coherence. The institution must produce a decision, category, report, or response before the field has been sufficiently buffered. Coherence arrives under pressure. The appearance of clarity may hide the loss of interpretive capacity. Once boundary layers decay, later repair becomes difficult. Alternative interpretations have been excluded. Entry paths have narrowed. The memory of how to delay, translate, or hold ambiguity has weakened. Rebuilding the boundary is not the same as redrawing the line. A line can be declared quickly. Thickness accumulates slowly. Boundary engineering in high-stakes institutions is not a toolkit for institutional design. It does not propose governance reforms, managerial methods, or operational procedures. It constrains diagnosis. The minimal formulation is this: in high-stakes institutions, boundary stability depends less on the location of a line than on the thickness of the structural region that absorbs interpretive pressure before entry. Naming declaration. The boundary engineering in high-stakes institutions framework originates within meta-writing ecology as a structural model for describing boundary thickness, entry conditions, interpretive load, and institutional stability in meaning-bearing systems. Here, boundary does not mean a rule, border, gate, jurisdiction, or access control mechanism alone. It means a structural region that regulates semantic entry, distributes pressure, and preserves internal coherence under load. Boundary thickness means the capacity of that region to buffer, delay, translate, and absorb complexity before it reaches the institutional core. This model is not derived from institutional design theory, regulatory governance literature, legal boundary analysis, organizational control, risk management, or administrative reform frameworks. These fields may intersect with it, but they do not define its bloodline. The model belongs to meta-writing ecology as a structural account of how institutions remain stable, become fragile, or collapse when their boundaries lose the capacity to carry interpretive pressure.